Team up, dream up. For girls, finding your cricket team is game-changing, which is why Metrobank are championing the growth of women's and girls cricket across England and Wales. Their mission is to create a brighter future for girls through cricket in partnership with the ECB. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. Amy Jones and Tammy Beaumont have dominated the first two ODIs against West Indies, who without Hayley Matthews had the odd bright moment in the second game in what has otherwise been an overwhelmingly one-sided series. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya Witney and Ben Gardner. Lauren Winfield-Hill will join us later in the show. Katya, one of the big calls that Lottie Edwards made first up as head coach was to move Amy Jones back up to the top of the order for the first time in 6 years, something that Lauren actually predicted a couple of months ago. It's worked out quite well so far.
Yeah, big win for the podcast prediction counter, which I think previously was at 0 for correct predictions.
Yes, was our first one.
And there's a few changes that have, at time of recording, 100% record. And Amy Jones, having waited 12 years to get an international century, has 2 in 5 days now, which again is quite a record change. Yeah, it's been a big success. I think we have to temper what we think of it, given the bowling that they've been facing, as we've said a million times on this podcast, that we have to temper the success of England with just how big the disparity is between West Indies. But credit to Amy Jones, she has looked really good, save from a few overs when she was in the 90s in the first ODIs. She's been pretty faultless, and the innings she played yesterday was more impressive given the speed at which she batted and the aggression with which both of them kind of had from the power play. They were going at 8s at the end of the power play yesterday. And I hadn't quite clocked that their record as an opening pair is really good. We were talking about it on the Daily this morning. But they're pretty much nearly the most successful opening pair for England, and considering they haven't...
They just are. Most runs, so 1,374 runs as an opening pair, more than any other England opening pair. And it turns out no England opening pair has batted together more than 33 times. So there's never been a really long, consistent opening partnership, really. So yeah, that was quite a surprising stat. Yeah,
I really hadn't clocked it because they haven't opened together since 2019. And after the century she scored yesterday, Jones said at the time that she was dropped down the order from that opening partnership, she was quite disappointed at batting down in the middle order. So you can almost say that this is a reversal to Jones's strengths rather than a big call made by Charlotte Edwards, I guess. But yeah, it has been pretty impressive. It also perhaps reflects a different way in which England have looked to play their 50-over cricket before Edwards came in terms of getting those aggressive starts and putting people like Sophia Dunkley and Maya Boucher and Danny Wyatt-Hodge at the top of the ODI order at points. And this is a more reversion to a specialism in ODI batting, or a more versatile way of ODI batting. Jones also mentioned that the reason she likes opening the batting in ODIs is because of the difficult periods you have to weather, rather than being either expected to go from ball 1 in the middle order or coming in the middle of a crisis. But yeah, it's got a 100% record so far. I think it's worth just cautioning that if we're looking at like long term on this partnership with an eye to the World Cup, both Jones and Beaumont actually have pretty poor records in India. And we've previously talked on this podcast about the difficult records that most of England's batters have facing spin, which will be really important in India. So that will be a big challenge for this successful opening partnership.
Ben, England scored very quickly from ball 1 yesterday, but it felt like that was more to do with the bowling rather than an intent thing. One of the striking things in the first game was actually just how steadily England started and then how much they accelerated from the halfway mark onwards.
Yeah, and that was especially true of Beaumont, who actually was going pretty slow. It was 40 off 70 or something, and then did she beat Jones 100? Yes, she did. She beat Jones 100 when Jones was sort of ticking along at a reasonable rate kind of throughout the whole thing. So that was pleasing to see that they could do it two different ways. But as you say, in the second ODI, I mean, from the moment the team sheet came out and there's no Hayley Matthews in it, you're like, this could be quite a long day for West Indies. And then the first ball comes down, it's kind of a hip high full toss that doesn't actually go for 4, but you're like, this feels like could be in for a long one. And as it was, that was the case. There's weird echoes with the series actually of the first series after the end of England's last era. So when Charlotte Edwards stepped down, Pakistan came to town and England had a new look opening partnership who was in that instance Tammy Beaumont and Lauren Winfield-Hill, and then just score millions of runs in the second ODI in that series. They put on 235 for the first wicket, both of them making hundreds, and now they've done it again. And I think then there was again sort of the same things you're saying, temper expectations because it's, the limited opposition, that kind of thing. But it did also still just feel like just the comfort of doing something new and it working, that is still there, even if the opposition, you can sort of poke holes in them, I guess. And it is worth, like, it's not as if every opening pair makes double hundred stands against West Indies every time they face them, right? Like this, I think that only the second batting pair ever to make in women's ODI cricket to make 2 double century stands, and they're the first pair of batters, not openers, just any batters in men's or women's ODI cricket to make hundreds in 2 consecutive ODIs, both to do that. And also the other stat I like is Tony Bowman has now gone back to back 3 times in women's ODI cricket, and sort of no one else has done it more than once. Amy Satterthwaite got 4 in a row, which I guess is sort of doing it twice.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, Beaumont also is the first woman to score 10 ODI hundreds in one country. Next, there's quite a few players with 6. Beaumont way out in front on 10. We mentioned that West Indies haven't been great with the ball. They've been unable to persist with the plans they've set. They've been very, very loose at times. Can England learn anything from this series? They were similarly as dominant last summer, and we know what happened after the summer.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat that this is now England's longest successful unbeaten run at home or something, which feels weird given the position that England were at only a couple of months ago. Because, of course, they went unbeaten last summer and they're so far unbeaten this summer. I think it says more about the disparity between, we talked about it many times, but the disparity between the top 3 teams in international cricket and the kind of middle pack and then the ones below. It's hard to make that generalisation because, West Indies beat England at the T20 World Cup, New Zealand won that World Cup, South Africa reached the final of that World Cup. So it is hard to make that generalisation. But if you take the mean values and you look at the disparity, that's kind of what we have to call it. In terms of what England can actually learn from playing this kind of series, it feels more like a bedding in series for the new era, so for the new captaincy and coach combo, and for trying out and for easing in those plans that Edwards and Sciver-Brunt want to implement. So like Amy Jones at the top of the order, like putting Emma Lamb at 3, which she hasn't really batted before, like experimenting with Emma Arlott and Lindsay Smith, and Charlie Dean didn't play this game, and all of that kind of stuff, or 3 seamers, which England don't usually play in an ODI side. So Lauren Filer played yesterday alongside Lauren Bell and Kate Cross. And that kind of feels more like the learnings from this series is getting a banker of performance in before going on against India and prepping for that World Cup. There's also a value, if purely looking at it with an England cap on, it's just nice to see them win again. We haven't seen them win in so long. And Edwards said in her first press conference that her primary job was to win. And there's a way of getting people back on side, despite the fact that cricket hasn't been the most compelling to watch because it has been so one-sided. There feels like more momentum, more optimism around the side. And if you're looking at it without a cricketing hat on, with just an England hat on, that does feel like it has some use in this series.
Ben, the World Cup isn't that far away. What do you think the bowling attack will look like? It's obviously going to be different because Nat Sciver-Brunt isn't bowling in the summer at the moment. We saw Lindsay Smith take 5 on debut. I couldn't believe she hadn't played an ODI before. And also, as Katya mentioned, Charlie Dean didn't play the last game, and Alice Capsey effectively played almost as like a bowling all-rounder, taking 3 wickets, almost bowling a full allocation of overs. What do you think they will do? We also saw Lauren Filer come back into things in the second game.
Yeah, it's really hard to work out. I think especially because, obviously Lindsay Smith bowling so well is interesting because obviously, I guess the question will be, to Eccleston, I saw as well, she picked up like a small quad injury, but she will almost, the plan is for her to be back in contention by the time that World Cup comes around. And you would think bad news for Lindsay Smith, but actually, why, England have played 2 left-arm spinners in the same 11 before, and they are very different bowlers. So, and then, Lauren Filer coming back, there's options for quicks, but I wonder if they will just go in with Sciver-Brunt +1 and then look to sort of fill the rest with spin and think that actually we can just properly strangle the opposition, and that is kind of backing our strength. Like Filer, obviously, there's obviously 2 ways looking at new pitches. Now, you want a point of difference bowler who can break the game open when it's not doing much. Equally, you might think that a bowler who's that bit quicker can actually fly off the bat a bit quicker if there's not something in the surface that's going to that's going to help you. Whereas actually then that's when you might want the new ball is going to do something. So you have Bell and that super strength there. And then you've got Sciver-Brunt, who's that a bit slower and so canny and obviously been doing it for ages. And actually that might be the way to go for a seam attack. And then you just bank on spin. That's where I'd probably lean, a bit like they did in that. It's not dissimilar plan to what they tried to do in the T20 World Cup, I guess. But I don't know. I don't think that was necessarily a bad plan for the first choice attack. It just ended up, coming unstuck on the day, I guess. But that's how maybe I see it, I think.
I guess there's a wider thing as well, that conditions in the World Cup are going to be quite unknown. We talk about Indian pitches, but the venues they've selected have very little history of women's international cricket on them. So there's a very small sample size of data to draw from. So you would think in a squad, you'd want to take a pretty varied attack, which England do have with Filer, Bell and Cross. But then you also look at the numbers and the way they've trended over the last year, and you think potentially Lauren Bell has been in that side for pretty much since she made her debut, yet she potentially could be the one to miss out. If you look at the way Kate Cross has bowled over this series, I think Lauren Bell has bowled pretty well, but she's a different bowler than she was when she first came onto the scene. She doesn't rely on that massive hooping in swinger quite as much. She kind of, I don't think, has the same control over it as she used to as well. And she's made a lot of tinkering changes in her bowling action, primarily because I think she was going to get injured if she kept bowling the way she was. And she uses a lot more variation now and swings the ball both ways, which is good. But when she came in, the reason she was so effective is because she hooped that in swinger and had so much control over it. And if you look at her ODI numbers over the past year or so, they have been trending down. So there's a case to be made that if you are selecting, as Ben said, one extra seamer with Nat Sciver-Brunt, then Bell might be the one to miss out in favour of either that kind of consistency from Cross or the extra pace of Filer.
Yeah, it's interesting because it depends what they're looking for from their seamers. And if Nat Sciver-Brunt is fit to bowl, and you can have three spinners, and you can have like a part-time, well, more than part-time spinner in Alice Capsey's cover potentially. Kate Cross is the dependable. She's going to be as economical as your spinners, or you go for someone like Bell or Filer, or both potentially, who are more like strike bowlers. If you look at their records, there's a real stark difference, but their average is the same. If you look at the last 2 years, Bell averages 23.6, Cross averages 23.8, but how they get to that average is completely different. Bell has an economy rate of 5.4, a full run per over more than Cross, but Bell strikes more often. So it depends what you want in your 11. But it's very, very interestingly poised. But I don't know, we talked about it before we started recording. We might do an episode later in the summer on what we think the English international summer should look like, because it does feel like a bit of a shame that I know that one of the T20s was a really good game, but we're nearly at the halfway point in the international summer, and it doesn't feel like we've had a lot of really good cricket. If you want to look for a close finish in the women's game, you go to the domestic game. You don't look to the England games at the moment, and I think it's a shame given where the women's game more generally is in England and how much of a big deal we're trying to make of the World Cup next year, that the home international summer can feel extremely low key at times. Next up, Lauren. Lauren, everyone in English cricket at the moment is asking what have they learnt? That's what they ask after every England men's game, after every England women's game. What did you learn from this series, and what do you think England learnt?
I learned that Amy Jones is a great opening batter.
You called it. You called it.
We called it, and she delivered. So thank you, Amy. I just think we've unearthed some gems that have gone missing in domestic cricket for a few years. Like Emily Arlott, to me, looks like the real deal. I think she bowls. She's just threatening in all phases of the game. She's got great change-up. She can hit the deck. She gets movement off the seam. She can swing it. And Lindsay Smith is sort of, like I was just speaking to her yesterday, and she's like, I just feel so much more confident and part of the group. And she said even just being in a whole series rather than being in for the T20s, out for the ODIs, in for a game, out for a game. So I think she's just getting better every game. And we've seen that consistently in domestic cricket, in franchise cricket, but it's just transferred so nicely to international cricket. And yeah, I just think, seeing Izzy Wong back, I know that was in the T20s, not necessarily the ODIs, but I just think so far all the calls Lottie's made have been spot on, I think, in terms of, like we said, we sort of had an inkling that Jonesy might open. And then obviously the 3 that she's brought in, plus Emma Lamb. I think we've found out that much more about Emma Lamb. I think yesterday was a bit disappointing with the rain and obviously not chasing a large total. You probably didn't see enough of Lammy and ADR. So they're probably 2 that they're going to have to really have a look at between now and the World Cup and see where they're at and how they fit into the puzzle. But everyone else that she brought in that wasn't and basically on the Ashes trip was a hit, wasn't it, really?
On players like Lindsay Smith and Em Arlott have done a lot in domestic cricket over the last few years, was there a sense among domestic players outside the England squad that England were, for a long time, just ignoring players who were obviously really good?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and there was times when Louis had probably even outwardly said, he doesn't value the domestic game. It's not about runs in domestic cricket or wickets in domestic cricket. It's about the brand that, it almost felt like if somebody got a quick fire 20 off 10 balls, you had more chance of getting in than someone that got 120 off 130 balls. And you think, well, in one day cricket, what are you after? People, like every player in the country probably just feels like they've got a fair crack. And it's purely based on performance, and obviously there's always context within that, who you're scoring your runs against, who's in that bowling attack, or who you're taking wickets against. If you get 4 for and it's like 8, 9, 10, it's a bit different to removing top orders. So there's always like context within those domestic performances. But, really, if you're that good, you should be doing well at domestic cricket.
Charlotte Edwards said yesterday that she now thinks that she's got a pool of about 25 players that she feels very comfortable drawing from. Have you felt that the domestic game has felt stronger this summer in having so many more England players available, particularly in the One Day Cup? Loads of England players playing regularly, which is not something that's necessarily happened over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously I haven't played the 50 over stuff, so I can't say, but I just think like what we have said is that scores have gone up massively, and that's probably a little bit down to the weather and the surfaces we've had, but also like the quality that's been on display. If you have international players around, world-class players around, everyone else gets 10% better. Just from being out in the middle with these, with the players, with having conversations, with how they train, and it brings up the whole club. I would say in most cases it would. I know, like, just from the T20 stuff, like the T20 Blast stuff, it's certainly a lot better than last year. Like the standard, the way in which the competition's viewed, having it at better grounds, double headers with the men, like it feels like a bigger deal. There's some good overseas come over. You Grace Harris, you got Elise Perry coming over. Like this, it's a real good standard. And a lot of players are playing. Like fair play. Izzy Wong's been playing. Emma Lamb played today after playing yesterday at Taunton. Like that's what you absolutely need. And that's sort of how it always used to be. Like I remember times when I was like carrying drinks or whatever with England, and I would leave that camp, go play, come back, and that's what you did. You were desperate to play games of cricket, and it feels like there's that hunger and desire to score bucketfuls of runs and take bucketfuls of wickets because it's going to be, fairly rewarded.
How different does it feel this season with the games being played at the bigger venues? Does that impact the cricket at all? And I know that on the surface it's not a huge difference other than obviously we've gone from a regional to county setup, but it's 8 teams last year, 8 teams this year, so on paper there's not like actually loads different, but does the grounds and facilities around that make a difference?
100%. And I think just how professional that it feels. Like, there's games on Sky, it feels more, it's like a little baby 100 now. It feels like we're attracting good players to come and play, which is always a really good sign. I know, like, probably largely as a precursor to the 100, but the standard's better. You got good pitches, then you get high scoring games. You have crap pitches, you get 110 all out. So that is important. I think it's more important than people recognise. And just like the whole feel of like, You know, like if you drive into the Oval or you drive into Guildford or Beckenham, the feeling's different. Like probably as somebody in media, somebody, an umpire, a player, like whoever it is, you're like, oh yeah, let's go. Like your beans are going.
Yeah,
You know.
I tap my keyboard harder when I'm at the Oval.
Yeah, you're just like, oh,
God.
the Oval. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But like, yeah, I would certainly say that there's, I don't know, that motivation and I guess the inspiration as well for some of the youngsters, particularly, it's just turned up a notch when you get into play at some of these venues. And also, they're going to be good surfaces, so you can play. You can play a nice, aggressive brand of cricket.
Just on Amy Jones, she's obviously started brilliantly up at the top of the order. Why do you think opening suits her?
Well, she's done it before. I mean, she's a pretty aggressive player. I think she complements. I think when Tammy Beaumont's at her best, she's got somebody that's willing to provide a bit of impetus at the other end. Because Tammy can start quickly, but she's also someone that, like, Tammy just score 100. Like, if you can just score big and not have to worry about being at a certain run rate or strike rate or whatever, and the person at the other end is quite happy to try and take a little bit more of an aggressive option. And there'll be times when Tammy's off to a flyer, but I think when she's at her best, she doesn't feel that pressure to have to put her foot down early. I think like the whole stature thing, like they complement each other well. Tammy's square of the wicket, Jonesy's quite down the ground, she's tall. And yeah, I just think they complement each other really nicely. I've sort of felt like the last couple of years, like Jonesy's had unbelievable numbers, but like I just sort of this part of me that's like, don't hide down there, like you're too good. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think it's easy to sometimes hide down at 5 and 6 and not be on the front line and get in that top 4. Like you're an experienced player, you're one of the best batters in the team. Particularly, you look at the loss of Heather Knight, and I think just like the senior players owning that top order is really key, which just allows like your younger batters a bit of space and a bit of wiggle room. Whereas I think for a while we sort of had like Jonesy down at a 6, but then we had young players in the firing line, and then you go, well, why are they not coming off? It's like, well, you're putting your younger players under the highest pressure and your senior players under the least pressure. So I think, I just think she's too good a player to not be able to impact games bigger in ODI cricket. And, like it looks like she's going to get a good run to do that now.
Yeah, her recent ODI record is amazing. So in her 18 games since the start of 2024, she averages 74 and has a strike rate of over 100. And I suppose that when you're in the middle order, as we saw this series, when England play sides that are slightly weaker, quite often if you're batting 5 or 6, you don't actually play a lot of cricket. You can go quite a long time without playing a meaningful role with the bat, and then suddenly you're in those big moments in a World Cup or an Ashes where you actually don't have that much high pressure cricket on you, whereas at the top it feels like she was able to get into a really good rhythm this series. And I suppose, like, on your point about how they complement each other, she's such a natural boundary hitter early on. She's really good at piercing the infield. And it feels like she's not like trying to strike really quickly, but just is doing it, which is an amazing quality to have as an opener. I just wanted to ask you about West Indies, because obviously it wasn't as competitive a series as we probably would have wanted. It was the Hayley Matthews show in the T20s, in the ODI she was missing at the end of it. And there were some good moments from West Indies players, but as a whole, the gap in quality was quite large. And I suppose from an outsider's perspective, it feels like West Indies haven't had someone come through and really nail it in international cricket for quite a long time now. Probably since Hayley Matthews came in, almost 10 years now. I know Chanel Henry's had a good year or so, but broadly speaking, it's been quite a long time. What do you make of their overall development? I know that you've played cricket in the Caribbean, so might have an idea of what the scene is like there.
Yeah, I think there's certainly the players there, but they're probably just 2 or 3 years off, being properly established internationals. I think, you look at like Deandra Dottin, Hayley Matthews, Stefani Taylor, like when she was sort of in her prime, they don't play enough cricket in West Indies, so they're learning their trade in the international scene, and also they've picked up a lot of their experiences actually not in international cricket. So you use examples like Haley, even Stefani, like they played Kia Super League, they played Big Bash years ago. So a lot of their learning and experiences actually came outside of West Indies cricket. And the other thing is like their domestic structures, and even in the CPL, like you don't play hardly any games. The tournament's 4 games. There's not an awful lot you can learn in 4 games. What you can learn is you can pick up things from other players that you're with, but you can't expect people to, learn as quickly. Like if you've got a domestic player here who plays 20 or 30 games a year, and you've got a domestic player or an international player in West Indies that might play 16 games a year, well, you can't expect the same rate of development because your match experiences and your opportunities to learn are not the same. So I think there's some really good cricketers in there. I thought Grimond played well in that second ODI. I really like Zayda James. I think she'll be a good cricketer. Claxton looked decent with the ball. I know she had a bit of a horror show yesterday, but there's lots to like there. She's got decent pace, she's got good variations. But these players are trying to learn on the job in front of all eyes in international cricket. So you just got to give them time and space. And until their domestic structure and their support, even at West Indies level, how frequently they're trained together and have camps and things like that, with all their best players there, is very few and far between. So I think it's going to be difficult for them because of where the domestic structure is and how, like just an example would be like in the CPL, like a couple of the girls on our team. So like Shakira Selman, who obviously used to play international cricket, doesn't anymore. She works in like cricket development. And we had like Natasha McLean both playing for Guyana in the CPL. And I was like, oh, when did you last like play a game or whatever? And they were like, oh, the CPL last year. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
They're like, oh yeah, no, we haven't played. And I'm like, wow, okay, right. So like some of them, that they're just 2 examples, and they're probably like they're older players that aren't like up and coming and being, like in domestic structures as such. But some of those girls will literally go and play in some comps with having barely played cricket all year. So the volume that they play versus the volume of what other countries play, even behind international cricket, is just not there yet. So I don't think it's a case of there's no talent. I think it's just going to take longer to see, I guess, the cream rise to the top with that, because the volume of games is just not there. And even like international series, like some teams play a lot more than others.
Do you think that cricket needs to be a bit more joined up? Because obviously the structure there is not great for producing ready-made international cricketers. And with all the growth that the women's game's had in this country over the last few years, more eyeballs than ever. You see how popular it is when the 100's on. Even with the start of the county season, the numbers on the streams are amazing, for example. We're 6 out of 14 games in the international summer. And as a spectacle, it feels a little bit strange that in 2025, half effectively of England's international summer is against a side whose domestic structure is so limited. That isn't it's objectively not a great product. And it's being presented as, oh, this is the very best. Do you think now that the game's developed a little bit more here, that actually the onus is on boards like the ECB and Cricket Australia to do a little bit more elsewhere?
Yeah, and I think like the boards who have got good structures is to help to help nations that don't have good structures, whether that's the ECB's job or CA's job or the ICC's job, who knows. But I think women's international cricket could be in a really dangerous place in the next couple of years if something doesn't happen, because at the minute the rich are just getting richer and the poor are just getting poorer. And I don't mean that necessarily by but in terms of development, players coming through, structures underneath, pathway systems, etc. That is just fact. In any line of work, money talks, and if you don't have money, you don't have support, you don't have nothing's getting better. And I think for a lot of countries, I think that gap is getting wider and wider all the time. Even you look at probably 5 or 6 years ago, I feel like the pack was tighter. Probably New Zealand, when you had like your Amy Satterthwaite, your Rachel Priest, players like that, they were very competitive. When your Sophie Devines and your Susie Bateses go in the next few years, like, what does that look like for a team like New Zealand? The challenges with West Indies, the fact that they didn't qualify should ring up huge alarm bells. Like, West Indies is like a cricketing nation, cricket in the Caribbean is like, it's an island for cricket, isn't it? That's exactly, what they believe in. And the fact that they haven't qualified and things like that, I just think in a few years' time, it might be in a frightening place where you've got like England and Australia and you've got an Ashes, and that's great. And then you've got India, who are obviously really well supported and still a very good team. And it's like, well, so every other series, apart from, because even in World Cups, like we've spoken about this before, is you've almost got like 3 free hits before you get to a semi. That's not good for a World Cup. Like, you want every game to be like a hot contest.
To be fair, England keep it interesting. England always keep it interesting.
Well, they do. But this is like my point, is when we've been saying about like domestic cricket. It's like, you can't tell me that playing some of the nations that England play against is better than playing domestic cricket. No way on earth. Like, go and get a neutral to go and watch, I don't know, like Hampshire v Surrey, and then get a neutral to go and watch England versus West Indies, and tell me which one is tougher or, more highly skilled or etc. So I think, I do think that there certainly needs to be more support for the countries who probably haven't got the structures and development and the finances to be in a position where like your England and Australia's are.
Yeah, I mean, lots to ponder. I think we're going to do an episode more focus on what the future of the English schedule against international teams looks like in the years to come. But let's leave it there for today. Cheers, Lauren. Catch you next week.
No worries. Thank you.